Hi, I'm Reverend Jake Zabe, and welcome to Children's Bible Stories. Alright children, our Bible story for today is going to be the story of Cain and Abel. So after Adam and Eve had been kicked out of the Garden of Eden, they did what God told them to do, which was go forth and multiply. That means they were to go forth and have babies. And so they had two sons to start with. The first son was Cain. Now the name Cain comes from the word meaning to possess or to give birth to. So it's like the one who is born is what Cain means. And when Cain was born, Eve actually said, "I have begotten a man, the Lord." Now some English Bibles will say "I've begotten a man by the Lord," but that's not true. The Hebrew says, "I have begotten a man who is the Lord." Martin Luther taught that when Eve gave birth to Cain, she actually mistakenly thought that Cain was the Messiah. She thought that Cain was God in the flesh. She thought Cain was the God-man. And so Cain really got treated very special. And this was going to lead to Cain later in life being very arrogant and very spoilt and thinking that he was much better than everyone else. And then they had another son named Abel. And poor Abel, the name Abel, it means like wind or emptiness. It was kind of like calling your son nothing. And so essentially Cain was named the one who is born, whereas Abel was called nothingness. We don't care about him, he's meaningless, just forget about him, he's just the other kid. And so the two boys grew up, and Cain decided to become a father like his daddy Adam. And so he worked in the fields and he farmed. Abel, however, became a shepherd and looked after sheep. Now what is most interesting is that at this point in time, humans didn't eat meat. When God created Adam and Eve, he commanded them to only eat the plants of the field and the fruit of the trees. And it was only after the flood that God gave permission to Noah to go forth and to eat animals. So at this point in time, humans didn't eat animals. And so why did Abel have to look after sheep? Well, after Adam and Eve got kicked out of the Garden of Eden, God sacrificed an animal. We don't know what animal it was, but it most likely was probably a sheep, since Abel became a shepherd, and also Jesus is the Lamb of God. So God, in order to cover the nakedness of Adam and Eve, sacrificed a sheep and used its skin to make clothes for Adam and Eve. So at this point in time, animals were killed for two reasons. One, as a sacrifice to God, and two, to make clothes for humans. And so when Abel looked after the sheep, he was looking after animals to be used for sacrifices and for clothes. So in this way, Abel was also a sort of priest. Now, one day, Cain and Abel came to make sacrifices to God. Cain went and took some of his crops and he sacrificed them to God. And Abel, however, went and took the best of his flock and he came and he sacrificed that to God. And God looked favorably upon Abel's sacrifice, but he didn't look favorably upon Cain's sacrifice. And now, the Bible tells us that the reason God looked favorably upon Abel's sacrifice is that it was offered up in faith. Now the question is, does it matter whether Cain sacrificed an animal or sacrificed his crops? Now some people think no, children, but the truth is the type of sacrifice did matter. Because when God led Adam and Eve out of the Garden of Eden, he set the example of what a sacrifice should look like. He sacrificed an animal. And so when Abel sacrificed a sheep, he was following the example of God and sacrificing in faith. He was doing what God did. God sacrificed an animal, so Abel faithfully believed that he too to sacrifice an animal. Cain should have done the same and gone over to Abel and said, "Brother Abel, can I please have one of your sheep to sacrifice?" Instead, Abel went and got all his crops and he offered them to God, not in faith, but in works. See, the reason why Cain was sacrificing his crops to God is because that was Cain's way of saying, "God, look at all the good work I did. Here's all my good work, God. Here, you have some of my good work." And so the difference between a crop sacrifice and the animal sacrifice was the difference between Cain doing a sacrifice of his works and Abel doing a sacrifice of faith. And so God looked at Abel and he was more favorable to Abel than he was to Cain, because Abel sacrificed in faith, whereas Cain tried to save himself through his own good works. And so that's where we're going to wrap up the story for today, children. If you join us again next time, we're going to discuss the very sad story of Cain killing Abel. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Abel. Goodbye and God bless.